Isla Turner had always dreamed of seeing the world, but she never imagined her very first airplane ride would feel like the scariest moment of her life. She stood inside the airport, staring at the giant plane through the window, her heartbeat racing like it wanted to escape her chest. Her hands were cold, her legs felt weak, and she kept whispering to herself, "You can do this." But her body just wasn't listening. The loud, echoing announcements, the constant rush of people, and the strange, sterile smell of the airport made everything feel new and incredibly overwhelming. Isla tried to walk with a confidence she didn't feel as she made her way onto the plane. Her eyes darted around, searching desperately for something familiar, anything to ground her. When she finally found her seat by the window, she sat down slowly, her fingers gripping the armrest like it was her only lifeline in a stormy sea. She squeezed her eyes shut and tried to focus on her breathing, repeating the mantra that millions of people fly every single day, so it couldn't be that horrible. But deep down, a raw, primal terror was bubbling up inside her. As the last passengers trickled in, Isla kept her head down, hoping her pale face and trembling hands would go unnoticed. That's when a calm, deep voice cut through her anxious thoughts. "Is this seat taken?" Isla looked up, and for a moment, she completely forgot how to breathe. Standing in the aisle was a tall man in an impeccably tailored, expensive suit. He had dark hair, sharp, intelligent eyes, and an aura of power that was effortless and undeniable. He offered her a polite, almost formal smile, and Isla could only manage to shake her head, her voice lost somewhere in her throat. The man sat down next to her, and the subtle, clean scent of his cologne filled the small space between them, making her even more aware of how small and nervous she felt in her simple jeans and sweater. What Isla didn't know, and couldn't possibly guess, was that this man was Nathan Drake, one of the youngest and most successful CEOs in the United States. He was a man whose face was often on the cover of business magazines, but Isla was far too consumed by her fear of flying to recognize anyone. The final click of the cabin doors locking sent a fresh jolt of panic through her. The low hum of the engines began to build into a powerful roar, and Isla's anxiety surged like a fast-rising tide. Her fingers twitched uncontrollably against the armrest, her chest tightened, and when the plane lurched forward to taxi down the runway, she felt her stomach plummet. She tried holding her breath, tried to will herself into a state of calm, but the moment the plane's wheels lifted off the ground, a wave of pure, unadulterated fear crashed over her. A sudden, jarring shake rattled the cabin. Isla gasped, a small, choked sound escaping her lips. Without thinking, without any conscious control, her hand shot out, desperate for something to hold on to. Her fingers closed around something warm, solid, and strong. When she finally dared to open her eyes, she realized with a sickening jolt that she wasn't clutching the armrest. She was holding Nathan Drake's hand. And not just holding it, she was squeezing it with all her might, as if her very life depended on it. Her eyes widened in horror. A hot blush flooded her cheeks, and she snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned, mumbling and mortified, "I'm so sorry." She braced herself for a look of annoyance, or even disgust. He was a man in a power suit. He wasn't here to be a stranger's stress ball. But when she risked a glance at him, his expression stopped her cold. He wasn't angry. He wasn't irritated. He looked soft, surprised, yes, but also gentle, like he was seeing something rare and unexpected. Nathan tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady and kind. In a low, quiet voice that was meant only for her, he whispered, "It's okay. Flying can be scary the first time." His tone was so calm, so warm and reassuring, that it managed to soothe a tiny fraction of the wild panic storming inside her. Isla just nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and forced her eyes forward, staring blankly at the seat in front of her. A few seconds of silence passed. Then, another small bump shook the plane, and Isla's fingers instinctively twitched again, ready to grab something. This time, Nathan slowly moved his hand on the shared armrest, shifting it a little closer to hers. He didn't touch her, but the gesture was clear. He was offering an anchor, letting her know it was there if she needed it again. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs, but this time, it wasn't just from fear. It was from something else, something new and warm and confusing that was blooming in her chest. She had no idea who this man was, or why a complete stranger was being so incredibly kind. She couldn't fathom why his gaze kept returning to her, as if she were somehow the most interesting thing on this entire plane. But as the aircraft climbed higher into the clouds, one thing became crystal clear to Isla. Her very first airplane ride was turning into something she would never, ever forget. For years, Nathan Drake built empires, led powerful teams, and made decisions that terrified others. But sitting next to Isla Turner on this flight felt different. It was calming, in a way he couldn't quite put his finger on. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, and even after it passed, Isla was trying so hard to look normal, but her hands were shaking. Nathan noticed right away. He'd met countless bold, confident people in his life, but none had ever looked as honestly human, as genuinely scared as Isla did in that moment. He leaned in just a little and said quietly, "Just breathe slowly, in and out. You're doing fine." His voice was so steady, like he was talking to someone he'd known and cared for forever. Not a stranger he'd just met. Isla nodded, trying to follow his lead. Her breathing was still a bit ragged, but it was getting better. She didn't dare look at him again. Every time she did, she could feel her face getting warm. Outside the tiny window, fluffy white clouds drifted by like ocean waves, but she couldn't appreciate the view. Her heart was pounding too loudly, and she was hyper-aware of the impossibly calm man sitting right beside her. Nathan watched her out of the corner of his eye, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he pushed aside all thoughts of his emails, his meetings, the massive responsibilities waiting for him on the ground. He wasn't thinking about business. He was thinking about her. He felt a sudden urge to distract her, to pull her mind away from the fear that gripped her. "Is this really your first flight?" he asked gently. Isla swallowed hard and whispered, "Yes, and probably my last." Nathan almost cracked a smile. "Why are you traveling?" he asked, his curiosity genuine. Isla hesitated. She didn't want to sound dramatic or desperate to this complete stranger. I'm going for a job interview," she finally managed to say. "Something I really, really want. But I almost didn't come because I'm so afraid of flying." Her voice cracked just a little on the last words, and Nathan felt something inside him shift. She was nothing like the people he normally met, the ones who wore masks of fearlessness and hid their true feelings behind a wall of fake confidence. Isla was real. She was honest, pure, and in a world filled with pretenders, he found that incredibly refreshing. "Well," he said softly, "I'm glad you came anyway." Isla finally looked at him then, surprised by his words. For just a second, her fear seemed to melt away, but the peace didn't last. A voice crackled over the intercom, warning of more turbulence ahead. Isla froze, her breath hitched in her throat. "No, no, no, not again," she whispered, her voice trembling. Nathan sat up a little straighter, seeing the panic rising in her eyes. "Hey, it's okay," he said, trying his best to sound reassuring and keep her calm. The plane dipped slightly, and Isla's hand shot out. She grabbed the seat in front of her, then the armrest, then the fabric of her own shirt, but nothing worked. It felt like the entire sky was shaking her. Then another sudden jolt. Isla gasped and, without thinking, clamped both of her hands around Nathan's arm, holding on tightly, desperate for something, anything, stable. Nathan didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, he slowly placed his other hand over hers, his fingers gently covering her trembling ones. His warmth instantly spread through her, like a comforting blanket, and her breathing started to steady. "I've got you," he whispered, a softness in his voice that even surprised himself. Isla stared down at her hands, wrapped around his arm, mortified but completely unable to let go. But Nathan didn't seem to mind at all. His touch was gentle, protective, as if holding her hand was the most natural thing in the world. The turbulence only lasted for a few minutes, but to Isla, it felt like she had just survived a hurricane. When the shaking finally stopped, she slowly loosened her grip, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. I'm so sorry," she said in a tiny voice. "I keep grabbing you like I know you." Nathan just shook his head lightly. "You don't have to apologize," he replied. "If it helps you feel safe, hold on as much as you need." Isla blinked, completely stunned by his kindness. And in that moment, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. There was a warmth in Nathan's eyes that didn't quite match his sharp, polished, CEO-like appearance. She had no idea who this man really was, but she knew one thing for sure. He was somehow changing her fear into something softer, something she didn't quite understand yet. And Nathan, looking back at her with this strange pull in his chest, felt something he had never, ever expected to feel at 30,000 feet above the ground. He didn't want this moment with her to end. The plane smoothed out, but my heart was still racing. Part of it was the turbulence, sure, but the other part was the strange comfort I felt sitting next to Nathan. I tried to stare out the window, to find some calm in the endless blue, but every tiny dip and shudder of the plane made my fingers twitch. It was like they had a mind of their own, ready to grab his hand again at the slightest provocation. Nathan must have noticed. He kept his hands resting gently on his lap, close enough for me to reach if I needed to, but not touching me. He wasn't crowding me, and I appreciated that. Still, I could feel his gaze on me, watching my reactions. He saw the way my eyes widened with every little shift, the way I tried to force a brave smile to hide my fear. It was like he could see right through me, recognizing someone who quietly weathered their own storms, someone who learned to get by without ever asking for help. And the more he watched, the more I felt this invisible thread pulling between us. It was strange. He wanted to protect me. This man who knew nothing about my life, my dreams, or my past. But the way I'd clung to him earlier, it felt real, honest, intimate. Just as I was lost in these thoughts, a flight attendant appeared with a tray. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked politely. I jumped, startled by her voice, and quickly shook my head, feeling a blush creep up my neck. But Nathan nodded at her. "2 waters, please," he said. When the bottles arrived, he opened one and gently placed it in my hands. "Drink a little," he said, his voice soft. "It will help." I hesitated for a moment, then took it with a small, "Thank you." I sipped the water slowly, grateful for something to do, something to focus on, other than the rising panic in my chest. I noticed I was holding the bottle with both hands, like a child clutching a security blanket. The moment was small, insignificant really, but it felt strangely meaningful. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Passengers, please remain seated. We're entering another patch of rough air." My blood ran cold. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and my shoulders tensed up like they were made of stone. "No, not again," I whispered, the words barely audible. Instantly, Nathan turned toward me. "Hey, look at me," he said, his voice calm and steady. I just shook my head, my eyes glued to the seat in front of me, bracing for the worst. "Isla, look at me," he repeated, a little more firmly this time, but still gentle. I finally managed to tear my gaze away and meet his. The intense fear in my eyes seemed to soften his entire expression. Just then, another tremor shook the plane, much stronger this time. I gasped, and without a second thought, my hand flew to his, gripping it for dear life. But this time was different. Instead of just letting me hold on, Nathan slowly intertwined his fingers with mine. His grip was steady, warm, grounding. My breath hitched, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the sudden, unexpected closeness. This wasn't the touch of a stranger. It felt too gentle, too protective, as if he'd known me for years, not minutes. The plane shook even harder, and I squeezed my eyes shut. Nathan leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a soft whisper right beside my ear. "You're okay, I promise. I'm right here." His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I don't know why, but the absolute calm in his tone made me trust him completely. I found myself breathing a little easier, my panic receding, even as the turbulence raged on outside. When the shaking finally stopped and the plane leveled out once more, a quiet stillness settled in the cabin. It was only then that I realized I was still holding his hand, our fingers locked together. A deep blush spread across my cheeks, and I slowly tried to pull away, embarrassed. But Nathan didn't let go right away. He only loosened his grip when I looked down at our joined hands, but his eyes stayed on me, soft and completely unreadable. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. How could I even begin to explain how much his presence had meant to me in that moment? He just nodded, his gaze deep and strangely vulnerable. It looked like he wanted to say something, anything to ease the awkwardness, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just kept looking at me, and I could almost see the thoughts turning in his mind. He was wondering why this stranger, this terrified but resilient woman next to him, was making him feel something he hadn't felt in a very, very long time. And as he watched me, he had a startling realization. Somewhere between the turbulent skies and my trembling hands, Nathan Drake reportedly, one of the coldest and most ruthless CEOs in America. Was Ewan thinking about business deals or corporate mergers anymore? He was thinking only about me, Isla. The turbulence finally passed, and the plane steadied. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. My fingers still tingled from the way he'd held my hand. How was I supposed to face him now? I was a jumble of emotions, embarrassed, grateful, confused, and strangely warm. All at once, I kept turning my water bottle over and over in my hands, trying to look busy, but he just watched me, his expression quiet, thoughtful, almost gentle. It wasn't the cold, distant look you'd expect from a CEO. He could see I was trying to pull myself together, so he didn't push, didn't ask questions or make jokes. He just leaned back slightly, giving me space but staying close enough that I didn't feel alone. For a few minutes, we sat in a comfortable silence, the soft hum of the airplane engines filling the space between us. I tried to calm my racing thoughts, but my mind wouldn't settle. Why was this stranger, this impossibly handsome and calm man being so kind to me? People didn't usually treat me like I was important, like I was worth their attention. I was used to being invisible, just another face in the crowd. But Nathan looked at me like he saw something different, something more. As I stole another glance his way, trying to figure him out, I caught him quickly, shifting his gaze away, as if he'd been caught staring. That tiny moment made my heart skip a beat. I didn't know why he was watching me, but a small, shy part of me actually liked it. The plane continued on its path, slicing through layers of white clouds. A flight attendant walked by, checking on passengers. Nathan gave her a polite nod, but I just busied myself with my bag, hoping no one could see how flustered I was. Then, the pilot's voice crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to begin our descent. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." I froze instantly. My fingers twitched, and my breath hitched in my throat. Nathan turned to me, and he didn't need to ask. He saw the fear written all over my face. "Landing is usually smoother," he said softly. "Just stay with me. You'll be fine." I nodded, not entirely convinced. As the plane began to lower, my stomach lurched. The sensation of dropping made me gasp, and without thinking, I grabbed his arm again, this time with both hands. My grip was tight, my shoulders were rigid, and my eyes were squeezed shut. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted closer, making me feel more secure. "You're safe," he whispered again, his voice like a promise, not just a hollow comfort. The plane dipped, and I let out a small, frightened whimper I tried to suppress. He gently traced his thumb over my knuckles, a small, calming motion that somehow grounded me. I swallowed hard and opened my eyes, just a crack, focusing only on him, his calm face, his steady breathing, the warmth of his arm under my hands. Looking at him, the fear started to shrink. I didn't even realize how close we were until the plane finally straightened out and the wheels touched the ground with a soft bump. The landing was smoother than I'd expected. The moment the plane rolled safely onto the runway, a wave of relief washed over me, and I felt myself almost collapse. I let go of his arm slowly, too embarrassed to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words so quiet they nearly disappeared. He just shook his head lightly. "You don't have to be sorry for being human." I blinked, surprised by the kindness in his voice. I was used to people mocking my fears, calling me dramatic or silly, but his words felt like a warm blanket wrapping around my shaking heart. As the plane taxied to the gate and the seatbelt signs switched off, people around us started unbuckling and gathering their things. I scrambled to get my bag, my only thought to escape before I could embarrass myself any further. I hoped I could just slip away quietly, disappear into the crowd, and forget that I had clung to a stranger like he was my anchor in a storm. But as I stood up to leave, I felt his gaze on me warm, steady, and full of something I couldn't quite understand. I didn't know it yet, but in that moment, Nathan Drake knew one thing with absolute clarity. He wasn't going to let me disappear so easily. When the plane doors opened and passengers began to move, Isla hurried into the aisle. She just wanted to disappear before Nathan could say anything else, anything that might make her already confused heart even more tangled. Keeping her head low, she clutched her bag tightly and stepped into the bright airport hallway. Her legs still felt shaky from the flight. The noise of the terminal was overwhelming, people talking, suitcases rolling, announcements echoing. It all just made her feel smaller and more lost. She told herself this was for the best. She would never see Nathan again. This strange, emotional moment was just something that happened up in the sky, something she could easily forget. But her chest felt heavy, almost disappointed, and she couldn't understand why. She forced herself to focus on her interview. She had just 1 hour to get to the company, freshen up, and look confident, even though she felt like she'd just survived a storm. As she slid into a taxi, her hands still remembered the warmth of his kiss. She shook her head quickly, trying to erase the feeling. "Don't be stupid, Isla," she whispered to herself. "He's just a stranger." But that stranger had made her feel safe in a way no one else ever had. Meanwhile, back inside the airport, Nathan stepped off the plane, much slower than usual. His assistant and driver were already waiting for him with documents and schedules, but his mind wasn't on business. It was still stuck on the girl who had run off the plane like she could get away fast enough. He didn't know her name, where she was going, or anything about her story. All he knew was how her fingers had felt wrapped around his hand, how her eyes looked when she was scared, and how something deep inside him had shifted when she grabbed him like he was the only thing that could save her. Nathan Drake never forgot moments, but he had never experienced a moment quite like this one. His driver, Mark, noticed the unusual softness in Nathan's expression as he approached. "Sir, long flight?" Mark asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Nathan didn't answer right away. His gaze swept across the crowded airport, scanning faces, almost hoping he might spot her somewhere in the sea of people. "Something like that," he finally said, his voice distant. Mark raised an eyebrow. Nathan Drake never looked distracted. This was new. Inside the taxi, Isla tried to steady her breathing as the city skyline rolled past her window. Her interview was in a tall, gleaming glass building downtown. She rehearsed her answers over and over in her head, but Nathan's face kept slipping into her thoughts. Why did he matter so much? He was just a man she met on a plane. A very handsome, calm, unbelievably warm man, but still, just a stranger. When the taxi dropped her off, Isla stood on the sidewalk and stared up at the huge, shining logo above the entrance. Drake Industries. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked. Then blinked again, hoping the letters would rearrange themselves into something else. No. No way, she murmured, her heart starting to pound loudly in her ears. This couldn't be real. She had just held a man's hand like she was drowning in fear. Man named Nathan Drake. And now, she was standing outside a building named Drake Industries. The connection was impossible, right? A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. It's just a coincidence, she whispered, trying to calm herself down. Don't overthink it. She walked into the lobby, forcing a confident posture, but her insides were twisted with so much nervousness, she felt sick. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile. You're here for the interview? Isla could only manage a nod, her voice completely stuck. Please wait in the lobby, the receptionist said kindly. Isla found a chair and sat down, her heart racing uncontrollably. Every person in a suit who walked by made her jump. Every elevator ding sent a jolt of panic through her. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime and Nathan Drake stepped out. He wasn't in his relaxed airplane clothes. He wasn't tired. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, surrounded by his team, walking straight into the lobby with an aura of power in every step. Isla froze completely, unable to move, unable to breathe. Nathan looked up, his eyes scanning the room and they landed directly on her. For a split second, pure shock flickered across his face. But then it was replaced by something else. Something warmer. Something that looked almost like happiness. He stopped walking. His team paused behind him, confused. And for the first time since she'd left the plane, Isla Turner felt her heartbeat stop completely. The stranger from the sky was here, and everything was about to change. Nathan Drake was a man who never stopped moving. His schedule was a fortress, every second accounted for, and people scrambled to keep up with him, not the other way around. He walked with a purpose that parted crowds. But today, that momentum came to a dead halt. The moment he stepped into the lobby of his own company and saw her, he froze. There, sitting in a guest chair, was Isla Turner. She looked small and incredibly nervous, clutching a resume folder to her chest as if it were a shield. His entire team, walking just a step behind him, nearly crashed into his back. They exchanged confused glances, but Nathan didn't notice. His world had narrowed to the woman sitting just a few feet away. Isla felt his stare like a physical touch. Her throat tightened as their eyes locked across the polished marble floor. A wave of heat washed over her, and she wished for the floor to swallow her whole. She wanted to disappear, to turn invisible, anything but to be seen by him. This was the man she had clung to on that turbulent flight, the stranger whose arm she had squeezed with a death grip, the person she had held onto for dear life. And now, he was walking toward her. Each step was slow, deliberate, and sure, echoing the pounding of her heart against her ribs. Good morning, Nathan said. His voice was surprisingly soft, a stark contrast to the bustling, high-powered energy of the corporate lobby. It was a voice she remembered, a voice that had calmed her when she thought she was going to die. Startled, Isla shot up from her seat, fumbling with her folder and almost dropping it. Hey, hello, she managed to whisper, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Nathan's assistant, a woman who had seen everything, looked back and forth between them, her professional mask cracking with pure surprise. Sir, the assistant began, recovering quickly. She's here for the junior design interview. Nathan gave a slow, deliberate nod, but his eyes never once left Isla's face. I'll take her interview myself, he said, his voice calm but leaving no room for argument. The assistant's eyes widened. This was unheard of. Nathan Drake, the CEO, did not personally interview junior applicants, ever. But he didn't give anyone a chance to question the decision. He simply gestured toward the elevator, a silent command for Isla to follow. Isla's legs felt like they were made of jelly. A frantic part of her screamed, to run, to sprint out the glass doors and never look back. But another part of her, a deeper, quieter part, was drawn forward by the sheer force of his presence. She followed him into the private elevator, and as the mirrored doors slid shut, the air became thick with unspoken words. The space felt impossibly small. Isla stared at her own worn shoes on the reflective floor, too mortified to look up, too scared to meet his gaze. Nathan watched her for a moment, the silence stretching between them. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and gentle. I didn't think I'd see you again. It was the same soft tone he'd used on the plane, a tone reserved just for her. Isla swallowed hard, forcing herself to find her voice. I didn't know this company was yours, she admitted, her words barely a whisper. A corner of Nathan's mouth lifted in a ghost of a smile. You didn't recognize my name? He asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Hila finally risked a glance up at him before quickly looking away. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I was a little preoccupied, trying not to scream." A low chuckle escaped him, a sound so rare that his closest associates hadn't heard it in years. "Fair enough," he conceded. The elevator chimed, and the doors opened onto the top floor. Isla stepped out into a space that felt like another dimension. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls revealed a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. The floors shone like mirrors, and the minimalist design screamed power and success. It made her feel even smaller, even more out of place. Nathan led her past sleek workstations and into his private office, a corner suite that seemed to float above the world. Isla tried to command her racing thoughts, to remind herself why she was here, but her mind was a whirlwind. She sat in the plush chair opposite his massive desk, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Nathan didn't sit down right away. He stood for a moment, looking out at the city, before turning back to her. He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed, studying her with an expression that was far too gentle for a CEO interrogating a potential employee. "Tell me about yourself, Isla," he said. It didn't sound like a typical interview question. It didn't feel like a test. It sounded like he genuinely wanted to know her. And so, she began to speak. The words tumbled out, slowly at first, then with more confidence. She told him about her passion for design, how it was the one thing that made her feel alive. She spoke of her small-town upbringing, her quiet life, and her big dream of proving herself in a city that felt a million miles away from home. She talked about how she had saved every penny for the flight, how terrified she was of the turbulence, and how she had almost turned back a dozen times. Nathan listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't check his phone, didn't glance at his computer. He gave her his complete, undivided attention, a commodity more valuable than gold. In his world, he watched the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her portfolio, the way she nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she spoke of her fears. The more she talked, the more something rigid and guarded inside of him began to soften. She wasn't like the other applicants who paraded through his office, slick with rehearsed confidence and aggressive ambition. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was just real, honest, humble, and completely, breathtakingly real. When she finished, she looked down at her hands, suddenly worried she had said too much, that she had been too personal, too vulnerable. The silence in the office was profound. Nathan remained quiet for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. Then, he spoke, his voice gentle. "I'm glad you got on that plane, Isla." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Why?" she whispered, the question hanging in the air between them. Nathan held her gaze, his own eyes dark and intense, and his voice dropped low, filled with an honesty that sent a shiver down her spine. "Because I wouldn't have met you otherwise." Ila's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightened, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was a warm, spreading, and deeply confusing sensation. She had no idea what this powerful man, Nathan Drake, wanted from her. She couldn't comprehend why he was looking at her as if she were the only person in the entire city. But she could feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a quiet energy growing between them, like the first spark of a flame that neither of them yet understood. As Nathan watched the blush rise on her cheeks, he knew one thing with a certainty that settled deep in his bones. He had no intention of letting Isla Turner walk out of his life, not now that she had, quite literally, fallen into it. Isla stood in the quiet garden behind Nathan's mansion. The cool night air brushed her face. And even though everything around her was beautiful, the soft lights, the white roses, the gentle sound of the fountain, her heart was beating so fast, she felt she might faint. Tonight, Nathan had asked her to meet him somewhere private. She had no idea what he wanted to say after everything that had happened between them. She remembered the panic on the airplane, the misunderstanding at the office, the unexpected kiss in the hallway, and the near breakup that left her crying for days. Now, as she waited, she kept twisting her fingers, wondering if maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe she wasn't enough for someone like him, a millionaire CEO with power, fame, and every woman's attention. But then, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Nathan walking slowly toward her, looking nervous in a way she had never seen before. His hands were in his pockets, and his eyes were soft, like he was afraid she might disappear if he blinked. "Isla," he said gently, stopping in front of her. "I know I've made mistakes, big ones, and I know I hurt you, even when I didn't mean to." Isla felt her eyes warm. Hearing this from the man who always looked strong, confident, and unshakable made her chest tighten, but she stayed quiet, letting him speak. Nathan took a breath and continued. "Before I met you, my life was cold, silent, like everything was going right, but nothing felt real. And then you walked into my world with your messy fear of flying and your shaking hands and your soft laughs. And suddenly, everything changed. Hila felt her whole face heat up as Nathan slowly reached for her hand, but stopped just a few inches away, giving her the choice. After a second, Hila placed her hand in his. He held it like it was something fragile and precious. Then he said, "You make me better," without even trying. And every day since that flight, I've found myself falling harder and harder for you. Isla's heart almost burst. She had waited for these words, prayed for them. She whispered, "Nathan, I thought maybe you didn't want me anymore." Nathan shook his head quickly and stepped closer, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you more than anything, Isla Turner. I was just scared. Scared that someone like me didn't deserve someone like you." Isla laughed quietly, a small, shaky sound. "I was scared of the same thing," she said. Nathan smiled, finally lifting her hand to his chest so she could feel his heartbeat racing under her fingertips. Then, with the softest voice, he said, "Isla, you changed my whole life without even meaning to, and I don't want a single day without you." And suddenly, he dropped to one knee. Slowly, nervously, almost shy. Isla gasped, so loudly she covered her mouth, her knees locking as tears filled her eyes. She never expected this tonight, not after everything. But Nathan stayed down on one knee, looking up at her with eyes full of love and fear and hope. He opened a small velvet box, revealing a simple, beautiful ring that sparkled under the garden lights. He said, "I'm not asking for forever right away. I'm just asking if you'll stay with me. Choose me. Let me love you the way you deserve. Isla Turner, will you be mine?" Isla couldn't stop the tears that fell down her cheeks, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Yes, yes, Nathan, I will." Nathan let out a breath like he'd been holding it for months. He stood up quickly, wrapped his arms around her, lifting her slightly off the ground as she buried her face in his shoulder, laughing and crying at the same time. When he finally set her down, he kissed her slow and warm, the kind of kiss that felt like a promise, a beginning, a future. As the night wrapped around them, Isla knew one thing for sure. Her first airplane panic had led her straight to the love of her life. And Nathan Drake, the man everyone thought had everything, had just told her she was the one thing he never believed he would find: his heart, his peace, and his forever.